Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. Today we are returning an old classic video format, reacting to Extreme Britain, Politics Joe's, Vox Pop series. I never really got why they called it Extreme Britain. I think it's just the name for their Vox Pops because the first one was asking people how they feel about immigration, and obviously a lot of people had the extreme view, quote unquote, of I don't want as many as we're getting. And so now they are asking Extreme Britain why in the safest Tory seat are they still voting Conservative? And honestly, it's something that I'm quite interested in. I want to see what these people say, so let's not waste time. Let's get into it.
Although they've really hashed up over the last 14 years, it was absolutely awful. But in our area, we've been very well looked after.
Just to translate that for you, effectively what she's saying is that the pension scheme is very good for boomers. And it's something that an awful lot of younger people, millennials and especially Zoomers, are saying. We just don't expect to get a state pension. We're not expecting it. So it is quite annoying when the boomer generation, who generally do seem a little bit more capitalist, especially than the millennial side of it, they are still voting effectively for subsidised retirement, which we're just not expecting to get.
They don't seem to have a grip on what actually people care about in the country, I would say.
Well, in their rhetoric, I'd say they do. I'd say they understand that people are quite annoyed with immigration. I'd say that they understand that people generally want the NHS to work, say. I don't think their problem is that they don't understand what people want. I'd say their problem is that when they have been in power for the last 14 years, in terms of the proportions of things they do that people actually wanted and things they do that people never wanted, it's probably like 30-70, something like that. And they'd probably still be in power if included in that 30 was immigration and actually letting the economy grow. But they are effectively socialists. So a lot of people have been saying, we really are just in the 70s again. What ended up happening post-war was you had the post-war consensus. Every party either wanted a soft form of socialism, Tories, or a bit harder form of socialism, Labour. And then you had Thatcher, who threw a spanner in that works. You got Tony Blair with New Labour, who pretended not to be a full-on leftist, and now we're at a point where people are still pretending not to be full-on leftists, and, well, look at what Labour's doing now.
And I think the danger at the moment with all these parties is this whole stupid word diversity has created so much division that Labour are going on about this stuff and the other, getting in Free Palestine. Actually, I'm not interested in Free Palestine. I'm not interested in Israel. I live in England. I'm interested in getting hospitals done.
Yeah, I'd imagine an awful lot of Tory voters, and certainly Reform voters, really do not care for all of this Free Palestine malarkey, which you are seeing in response to people protesting. And I don't mean the rioters. The rioters are a completely different issue as far as I'm concerned. But you go on TikTok, there's still protests going on for people saying, stop the boats, British Lives Matter. I've seen it myself. I probably actually have pictures somewhere, actually. In fact, yeah, I do. There are still people out there protesting about, 3 girls getting stabbed in Southport and the fact that we don't want immigration, and we're trying to make that clear. This is straight from TikTok. And as Dominic Cummings said to Chris Williamson, it genuinely seems to be the case that people who basically see these things on TikTok and go on Twitter are genuinely more informed than people say at the BBC or The Guardian. And I have no doubt that this woman only watches the BBC, probably reads The Telegraph or the Daily Mail, something like that. So she'll be slightly more informed than people who read The Guardian. But what I'm trying to say here is that these opinions are quite firmly her own. As much as you have all these narratives that, these are peaceful protests with the pro-Palestine marches, despite the fact that they have Intifada literally written on their placards. They're shouting for it, they're shouting from the river to the sea. All this stuff that has effectively made it so that Jews don't feel safe in London every weekend. And she understands that. And probably has her opinions obviously influenced by the Telegraph. But what I'm saying is that you obviously have the overarching mainstream narrative that is just washing over her. She doesn't care. But at the same time, she probably doesn't like Farage, and that's why she voted Tory. I mean, obviously we'll get into it because there's more to say here, but effectively the type of person I can see who voted Conservative is someone who really hates Labour and doesn't trust Nigel Farage. It seems to be if you're in that category, you're right-wing and don't like Farage, you either didn't vote or you voted Tory.
While election night wasn't fun for a lot of Conservative MPs, it was pretty good for Bob Blackman. He was one of only 3 Tory MPs to increase their majority, and the only one to be returned with more than 50% of the vote.
I mean, I'm going to be honest, I'm pretty amazed that there's still such thing as a Tory safe seat, but, well, it's interesting that there are still places that hate Labour that much.
Jill, this is now the safest Conservative seat in the country.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think there are a load of snobs around here.
It is one thing that I will always like about Tory voters. They are certainly one of the most self-aware cohorts of the political world. And yes, snobs will absolutely be voting Conservative for their entire life.
How did you vote in the last election?
Conservative. Which I never thought I would do, I've got to tell you.
Was that a vote for Bob Blackman, or was that a vote for Conservatives?
It was a vote for Conservatives, actually.
That's not the line of questioning I'd go with. I'd ask her, well, who did you vote for before the Conservatives, if she'd say you'd never thought you'd vote for them. Also makes it even more interesting that she's voted for Conservatives again this time round.
Yeah, because although they've really hashed up over the last 14 years, it's absolutely awful. I mean, we've had 4, don't forget, prime ministers and everything.
Yeah.
But in our area, we've been very well looked after, and that's a very selfish thing to say. We have been well looked after, we have been listened to.
I don't see why that's a selfish thing to say. The point of having your representatives in Parliament is that, yeah, you are looked after. Your concerns are taken seriously, and, yeah, your life is improved. It's not selfish to then vote for bettering your life again. You're not doing it necessarily at the expense of other people. Because I'm not being funny, but I imagine East Harrow, if it's full of snobs, probably isn't the place where immigrants who come over on boats go. And so you can say, well, that's how we've been well looked after, because, you know, the riffraff has been kept out. But, okay, I imagine you also voted to keep illegal immigration to 0, and I imagine you voted to keep immigration full stop. You know, probably not down to net 0, but at least reduced from the current rate. But it's a silly attitude most Brits have, and I really do hate it, where they think that voting means that I'm doing my charity work. And people are shamed like this for voting for their own interests. Well, no, you're supposed to vote for your own interests, that's the point. But people vote for their own interests in such a way where they're effectively doing it in lieu of actually doing something virtuous for their fellow man. I'm voting for Labour because they'll save the NHS and, you know, give people pay rises in, say, the public sector, which, as we've seen, is apparently just a pay rise, asking for absolutely nothing in return. And what that ends up doing is, with the good intention of paying the public sector more, which they don't deserve, but if you're not giving them that while saying increase your productivity, improve the computer systems and information sharing between NHS hospitals, give us automatic ticket machines at stations, things like that, you're just going to end up having a price spiral. Because what you're effectively doing is giving people more wages, which in broad terms have been in line with inflation, but giving them a pay rise without an increase in productivity, and yeah, that does cause a pay rise inflation spiral. As we saw just last week with the increase in pretty much all public sector pay, inflation instantly went up by 0.2%, which isn't an awful lot, but as time goes on, that ain't getting better.
Now I was voting Bob and the Conservatives.
What is it that you liked about the Conservatives?
Well, I like them, but I'm just worried about what Labour was going to do.
I mean, yes, if every Tory voter is honest, this is exactly why they were voting Tory, because a lot of these people, bear in mind, they're relatively old. They'll remember the 70s. They don't want the 70s again. Again, a lot of people are saying that, oh, it feels like we're going into the 70s again. That's never cited as a good thing. If we said we're going into the 80s again, a lot of people would be saying that as a good thing, because generally the 80s was seen as quite a hopeful time for people, and resulted in the 90s, which pretty much everyone wants to go back to. It's amazing how correct Matrix was on that point.
What were you worried about?
Well, I suppose more on immigration, I suppose, is one thing. And nothing against immigration per se, but obviously you've got to limit numbers.
There's another problem I have with an awful lot of right-wingers, especially the older ones. Just say you have a problem with immigration. This is exactly what has happened with the massive overreaction to Enoch Powell's speech in Birmingham in 1968. People don't want that name invoked, even though people like him. An awful lot of Tory voters only have good things to say about Enoch Powell, but they cannot be bothered, essentially, with the conversation that comes after if his name is invoked on the subject of immigration. Basically, people just don't want to be called racist, and to be honest, I don't expect the older generation to change their habits here, but especially with younger right-wingers. I mean, like we saw the one who was talking to Owen Jones about Enoch Powell. Just start being more confident with it. Learn all the standard arguments, because they're all nonsense. Slap all the opposition arguments down, and just be, puff out your chest when you say it. Say it with grace. I agreed with Enoch Powell. And what, they're going to call you racist? Well, they call everything racist. Who cares? But as I say, I don't expect the boomers to do that, because they're having pretty cushy lives as they're on their way out.
So housing and GPs and everything else. Also concerned about their stance with Israel. We could be as supportive as Conservatives were.
It's quite annoying that Ed Campbell, the interviewer, isn't really pushing him on any of these. I want to know details. What doesn't he trust about housing? Does he mean he thinks they'll start building on the Greenbelt too much? Is he a NIMBY, or is he more of a YIMBY? I don't know. I'd be quite interested to find out. GPs as well, what's his issue there? Does he think that they're going to overpay them? Does he want them to be gotten rid of because they're just pointless triage at the front line? Or does he think they deserve more pay and that he doesn't want them to go on strike? And then, I mean, honestly, the whole Israel situation, I think that's actually code for... I think we're going to see a lot more two-tier policing. We're going to see a lot more protests. And yes, they are going to reduce their support for one of our allies, which isn't necessarily a good thing.
How did you vote in the election?
I voted for the Green Party.
I've been saying this for quite some time, but I actually genuinely think that the Green Party is going to overtake the Labour Party, especially after this Parliament. Although, having said that, both have been dropping in the polls recently. I imagine the Green Party are going to, now they have 5 MPs, they don't have 5 MPs, sorry, they have 3 or 4, I can't remember, but they're going to push harder on their radically left-wing and socialist agenda. And that's going to make quite a few people happy, because Labour are going to quite literally have to do some light austerity, effectively some budget cut and a lot of tax rises, but they are going to make sure that that doesn't get burdened onto working people, because they promised that. And the Greens will keep being idiots and saying, oh, we can just borrow £100 billion every year to fund all this ridiculous green energy that we want. They're completely ignoring the fact that Labour are pushing massively on the green energy side of things, and that's probably not going to go very well either. I'm genuinely worried that we're going to end up with blackouts with the way that Labour's energy policy is going. The only place in the world where renewable energy seems to actually work is effectively Scandinavia, where they are very sparsely populated, and they actually have the environment where that would be useful. Norway, for example, something like 90% of its energy comes from hydroelectric power, and that's because they have these massive mountains where the water's at the top and it goes through these very, very effective turbines that are basically just big water mills. And it obviously produces a decent amount of power for all these sparsely populated villages and towns. Obviously cities need something bigger, but this is the problem. Britain, especially England, is a country of cities with, a few rural and suburban towns.
It was a toss-up between Labour and Green, and then on the day I decided I'd vote for the Green Party. As everyone always says, nobody ever votes for them, so I was like, well, let's give them a chance.
No, don't. No, seriously, don't. They, a lot like Labour when it comes to councils, of all the councils under threat, barely any of them are Tory councils. There's a few Tory councils going bankrupt. Obviously, they're not free from it. Most of them are Labour councils, and Green councils have pretty much permanently been under threat of going bankrupt. When it comes to seeing how these political parties do when it comes to actually being in power, Greens genuinely seem to be the worst. Labour are close second, obviously. I mean, we're seeing that right now. As I said, I don't think they're going to last more than 3 years. Obviously, with the majority they have, there is a good chance that I'll be wrong, but I'm sticking by it. I don't see how Rachel Reeves's light austerity is going to be seen as, oh, she's just another George Osborne by an awful lot of the backbenchers, and I don't see how they don't rebel. I also don't see how, given that they're quite open that they have been intimidated into a lot of their positions by Muslim cohorts, how they're going to square that with an awful lot of people noticing that, and they're obviously going to keep pointing it out. Say people like Farage or Richard Tice. Obviously, it'll take years to chip away at this majority, but I can see there being a split. Hell, I can see people from Labour defecting to the Greens.
I don't like any of the parties, I think they're all disgusting, but I mean, I think the Conservative Party have looked after us living here.
I'd be interested to hear what her problem with reform is, because I've absolutely no doubt in my mind that Farage is basically going to be the only reason. I don't know what it is, but there's this cohort of boomers that just absolutely hate Farage, and I can't quite put my finger on it. My mum and dad are quite open to Farage, but even they say, oh, he's clearly just in it for himself. And I don't see why they say that. Farage didn't want to ever have to come back to politics. The only reason he came back is because people on the street were asking him to come back. He came back because there was demand for it. And I'm not being funny, but he's done very well for a party that is relatively small, relatively new, and generally just finding its feet and voter base. Feet and voter base. And, well, that's why I'm going to be joining them and getting involved with the local politics, because it's how you build a decent political party. You go on the ground in council elections. This is what Greens have been doing for decades, and they've only just managed to get 4 seats. But if you start off with 5 seats and then go on the ground to try and win over people locally, yeah, that's going to go really well.
Did you vote in the last election?
I did not know.
Why didn't you vote?
So for me personally, when I didn't vote is because I felt like I'm not knowledgeable enough on it.
I'm telling you now, if most people had the self-awareness to know that they don't really know anything about politics, you'd probably see a turnout of about 5%. But barely anyone knows anything about politics, and I really do appreciate it when people are self-aware about that.
Right. So I do listen to the MPQs all the time.
Hold on, assuming that's true, how do you listen to PMQs all the time and not be knowledgeable on current events and politics? That's a very confusing statement.
But it's still very hard for me to know what the right decision is. And I kind of feel like with me not waiting, everyone else's vote is worth a little bit more.
I mean, that's true. It's something that constantly keeps being brought up, but Labour are in on a massive stonking majority with one of the lowest turnout elections ever. And also, not only that, with one of the lowest vote shares for a majority ever. 34% of 50% of the people voting. It's about... The country is effectively turning into a Starmer dictatorship because of the vote of 20% of people, something like that. And yeah, this is part of the reason that a lot of people are worried.
You said Paul Blackman does a good job locally.
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Well, he seems to always... Well, we have various events and he always turns up.
Yeah, this is something that goes very underappreciated with, I think, especially an awful lot of terminally online righties. They don't understand how much good it actually does for an MP to actually turn up to real-life events and community events going on in their constituency. It's one of the reasons why my mum and dad's whole constituency kept voting Conservative for so long. It's because the MP would turn up at an awful lot of community events and would drive constantly back from London to South Manchester just to appear at these things, and especially if they were explicitly political. But as a recent example, some of the Reform MPs went to Skegness just to basically show their face at a fun fair and appear like normal, approachable people. And you had some people on Twitter saying, why are you doing this? You know, why are you mucking about? Why aren't you effectively 100% of the time doing nothing but attack Labour on their policies, positions and problems in the UK? And the reason is because if you do that, you seem like a terminally online mentalist, is effectively the reason they don't do that. Your MPs need to seem like normal people. A big complaint people have is that there are career politicians that effectively do not act and do not appear to be normal people. Michael Gove would be one of my main examples.
And he's been very helpful on various schemes. For example, I think he helped with the in Stanmore, they were going to do the development, ridiculous development in Stanmore station, and he helped to stop that.
Oh my god, this is another problem I have with boomers. An awful lot of them are absolutely massive, which one is it? NIMBYs. And this is the thing, what do you like about your MP? Yep, he stopped development of a train station in my area. Now, I don't know the details of it, but every time I just think that was probably a completely harmless development, and it's just your initial reaction to change. I was right, by the way. It's a mid-rise building for people to live in. Again, London is the place where housing demand is highest because it's basically the only place in Britain where you can get a decent job. And so obviously you got jobs there, you need housing there. Oh, you have a mid-rise building for apartments for people to be right next to a station, and that is a ridiculous development. Again, we're talking London, it's not exactly the countryside. But this is what I hate about YIMBY arguments. It's always, oh, don't concrete over the countryside. Okay, we'll build next to a train station. Oh no, don't do that. And basically all it comes down to, I wish we were honest about it, it just comes down to the fact that you just know that this housing is going to go to foreigners. I know that that's the reason, and I know that that's also a problem. But guess what? I am also for stopping immigration. So just because as this is being built, at the end of it, it might go to a few foreigners at some point, doesn't mean that then we can't stop all immigration and put push factors in place that make them effectively want to either go elsewhere or back home. And I'm not being funny, but the way Labour are going, if the economy crashes, they'll probably want to go anyway. So I wouldn't worry about that. And this is even before I've pointed out that this was going to be built on a car park. Like, this is what I hate about NIMBYism in the UK. They have some good points maybe when it comes to nice areas of the Greenbelt. An awful lot of the time, though, it comes down to this. A car park's going to be turned into housing. Oh, the horror of people willing to buy homes that are being developed. But as I say, though, I think the NIMBYism issue is much more of an immigration issue than an actual NIMBYism issue. I think people will be absolutely fine with this if the underlying expectation wasn't that it's going to be foreigners buying these sorts of things. Again, I can understand that argument. I just wish they'd openly make it.
I have never encountered racism here. And I'm Jewish, and I've never encountered it here. And I think that the community actually looks after each other. We love the Indian community. We speak with the Muslim community, and we don't have this segregation.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from the top. And I think the danger at the moment with all these parties is this whole stupid word diversity is creating so much division.
We know what she says at this bit from the start, but I do find it interesting that her take on effectively integration is that it's actually been a success from the top. And she actually thinks the Conservatives are the ones successfully integrating people. Now, it might be true in her area, maybe, I don't know, but an awful lot of other areas, as we've seen over the past couple of weeks, do not agree with that take at all, really. And I do agree, an awful lot of integration does come from the top. It's all to do with policy, and it has been a total abject failure for the past 14 years at the very least, and going beyond. Some would argue going back to 1968. There were problems then with integration. And guess what? Generally, people saw the left-wing attempted integration policies to be the problem. They were saying it back then. And, well, I suppose this is 50 years of seeing that problem grow and grow and grow.
And the fact that seats have been won in the country for Free Palestine is pathetic. Because we are English, I want hospitals, doctors, get an appointment locally.
Well, that's interesting. It's been completely topped on its head, this, hasn't it? The integration has gone very well, and I think that's from the top down. But integration's also been so bad that there are now at least 4 members of Parliament who have been exclusively voted in on the Free Palestine ticket. A foreign war. That even this woman who said she's Jewish, clearly very well integrated, because apparently she doesn't even really care about the war over in Israel and Palestine. That's how well integrated she is. And that's probably because her Jewish ancestry came over to Britain in the 1800s, say, because a lot of them did move to London when they came over. And so, yeah, plenty of time to integrate there. Not had as much time with other people who've come over more recently.
I think it's down to the demographic of the area. I think it is Bob Blackman did quite a big campaign around here. He came door to door, he knocked on my door. It wasn't the result that I was expecting, but I think it is down to the demographic of the area.
I mean, from the sounds of it, it sounds an awful more like the MP is very happy to do a ground game, turn up to all these events, help with the NIMBYism of the area that they clearly very much have and support. And obviously that's made an awful lot of people in the area happy, despite the fact that it's part of a party that they basically all hate. But she does keep going on with demographics, and luckily Ed does end up pushing her on this.
Talk me through the demographic.
I would say that the area is quite a wealthy area in comparison to the rest of the surrounding boroughs and things like that. I would say that there's a lot of second-generation immigration here, and I believe that they have seen the government and the local government support them.
So it's a wealthy area, and as the first woman said, they're all snobs, so that's partially why they're voting Tory, but also, interesting she says there's an awful lot of second-generation immigration here. So far, I think of everyone that Ed Campbell has been interviewing, I think one guy hasn't been white. So, kind of interesting that she says there's a lot of second-generation immigration there, because especially from other places that Ed Campbell has interviewed people, doesn't really seem that way.
Through that transition, and I think that they just want to keep the status quo.
I basically think most people have brought him back in because of the NIMBYism and the fact he's quite personable. That's probably the main two reasons here.
Bob Blackman himself seems to be quite popular in this area.
He is. Bob Blackman, he is a master at what he does. I would say that he's very good at ensuring that he makes sure that everybody feels like they are included.
I'm kind of getting the feeling she wants to say she hates him, and I think she just wants to say she hates him because he's a Tory, but then at the same time doesn't want to say that on camera because it's obviously bigoted, and is so just trying to find any reason she can to, I suppose, in her defence, understand why people would vote for him. And as far as I can tell, it's the same reason I've already picked up from other people. He's personable and tries to put people's issues forward to Parliament. I mean, I wrote to my MP 2 weeks ago at this point. I've still not heard back.
He reaches out to lots of different people, but he definitely has kept on top of who is current in the area and how he appeals to them.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much how most MPs win their elections, so I suppose that's fair enough, but I suppose this is what we're finding out here. Most people who are voting Tory are doing it because they like their MP, not necessarily because of any party policy thing. And if it's not that, it's to keep Labour out. I mean, my mum and dad's area, that changed from a pretty safe Tory seat to Labour, and it's because it was Sir Graham Brady's seat, and obviously he had stepped down as a candidate this year and was replaced by someone he was hoping, I suppose he was mentoring, and obviously he lost because people want Graham Brady, not someone else. And obviously an awful lot of people voted Labour in that area because, well, a lot of Tory voters just didn't bother. And I know they didn't bother. I know them.
I think it's from, I guess, speaking to most senior people around here, I think there's a lot of goodwill towards the MP in particular, I would say. Maybe some conservatism in the sort of background of the people who've moved here and just the kind of the older people who've come here.
Again, there's another guy who says that there's a lot of people who've moved into East Harrow, which I can completely believe. It's a London area. That's where a lot of immigrants go. But I'm just finding it pretty impressive that Ed Campbell's only managed to find one person who I'm assuming is a second-generation immigrant, because it sounds like the place is full of them. Where are they? You'd think even though Ed's effectively randomly sampling the area around him midday on probably a weekday, I assume this is, it's just kind of interesting that you're not seeing any of them.
It's quite a wealthy area. Lots of people with like big houses who are doing big extensions. Don't know. I think maybe all that has a bit of a factor to play.
Yeah, so again, why are people voting Tory? Because they're rich and don't trust anyone else and probably hate Farage. Quite amazed that Farage hasn't actually, or Reform even, has been mentioned here. I do find that quite interesting, but, well, I don't know, we're not over yet.
The issues that matter to me, mainly around, I think, the NHS and waiting times.
If she starts going into her answer to all these things, I guarantee that basically all she's going to say is throw more money at it. Which kind of shows that she should have been more like the other guy who said, yeah, I kind of know politics, but don't understand it enough to be in a position where I feel like I can vote and understand what I'm voting for, which is a massive issue with universal suffrage.
I myself have experienced something where I've had to wait nearly 9 months for a gynecological appointment, and it's just unacceptable, really. I think in particular women's health is something that's not really respected much and is looked into.
I mean, it's so annoying listening to people like this. I don't think women's health is taken seriously. You think that's just because you were trying to get a gynecological appointment and had to wait 9 months? You know what that actually indicates more? It indicates that a lot of women are taking their health seriously and the NHS has a long waiting time because it's trying to take gynecology seriously, a women's health issue, for God's sake. They only have so many resources. Productivity isn't getting better. They think that basically the only way to improve it is by getting a hell of a lot more nurses and doctors in. They keep doing that. Waiting times don't improve that much. Quality definitely takes a dip. And just overall NHS productivity has just been down the sink for, well, decades at this point, as long as I've been alive. I can't ever remember anyone's having anything actually good to say about the NHS, apart from abstracting it to something it's not. Oh, it's a great healthcare service that saves lives. I'm sorry, I know enough people who have died at the hands of the NHS to know that that's just nonsense and something massive has to change, but you're not going to put that in people's heads. Because people think, oh, I'm paying a bit to charity to get people free healthcare. Guess what? Everywhere else in Europe has free healthcare, if you need it. They also happen to be much better healthcare systems. Why don't we try emulating that?
I'd say that I feel like the government are out of touch in terms of, do they understand what the average person goes through on a day-to-day basis? Are they looking to the future, or are they just looking to succeed for themselves? Is there ego in there? And all of these sorts of things. So
yeah, that's all pretty much true. I mean, the Greens are guilty of this as well. I remember Politics Joe interviewing Carla Denyer, the co-leader of the Greens. I don't know why they have co-leaders. I've always hated that. But interviewing her, she just lie about the Greens' problem with NIMBYism, where they're supposed to be this party that's all for green power and things like that, and the councils always block solar farms and wind farms, which I'm not necessarily against, by the way, on that type of NIMBYism. But I do find it funny that the party that is supposed to be pushing for more wind farms and solar farms, and they're always against it, and she just lies about it. And she lies about it because she knows that it sounds really stupid to say, I'm for all this renewable energy, but I'm blocking it at every chance I can get.
for me, that's mainly I just wanted somebody who looked like they were going to be honest, somebody who would have something to say about the future, and also to look into what actually currently matters to people.
Yeah, I don't care what you say. The Green Party are not honest. Some people in the Green Party will be honest about their politics and will probably actually believe all the nonsense they say, but given that an awful lot of the politicians are against actually, building the green infrastructure, yeah, a lot of them just talk nonsense and do lie. So I don't think she's necessarily aware of that, though. You're not going to be hyper aware of what new parties are actually like. This is true of Reform as well, by the way. We didn't exactly know how they'd be like, but obviously with all the nonsense coming out of mainstream sources about them being racist and what have you, as you would usually see, then, yeah, naturally people like me are just, well, you're obviously lying about them, I'll give them a chance.
There was an election tomorrow. There's not going to be, obviously.
Right.
But what policy issue matters to you the most, would you say?
One of the most, I suppose, immigration is very important. Education, also on tuition fees. So my son has got huge debt and he's paying like 9% interest on that debt.
Immigration, yes, but he's bringing up student loans again, and this is going to be something that I have to explain to people all the time. Student debt is the most student-sided loan I think you could ever imagine. You could technically pay none of it off for 30 years and it just gets written off. All it does is that when you earn over a certain threshold, it used to be, I think, 25,000, I think that's dropped now, or 25 might be the new rate it's at now, but whatever threshold it is, whenever you're over that, you pay 9% of anything you earn over that off. And I'm pretty sure even that's after tax. Just to put it in perspective, I earn around medium wage, we'll say. I am paying off about £30 of my student loan per month. It is peanuts. I am never expecting to ever actually pay it off. However, I am also aware that it's getting written off in 30 years. So I just see it as part of my paycheck coming off. And you know what? It's a pretty good deal to have basically gone to uni for free for 3 years. Honestly, I don't know why people don't understand this. It is not a boat I think we should be rocking. I don't think it can last forever, and I think trying to rock that boat is going to make student loans a hell of a lot worse for people who say that they don't want it. I mean, to be fair, I want an awful lot of universities closed down and turned back into polytechnics, or just closed down for good if they're that mental. And it looks like it's going in that direction because people are not seeing benefits to going to university anymore. All it ever was, and especially it felt like to me in my generation, was the schools and sixth forms and colleges say, you need to do as well as possible to get into uni, because the more people that go to uni, the better uni they get into, the more going to Oxbridge, the better we end up on the league table. That's all the incentive was. It was all down to incentive of how many of your kids went to uni. And so that's all anyone ever cared about. And it's kind of no wonder that no one can get a job, that when people are leaving uni or school and going into the workforce, they have to learn a whole new skill set because they never learned it from school, because school was only there to try and keep them in academia as long as possible, which is a completely different and useless skill set in the real world.
Oh my god.
People didn't realise that.
Yeah.
How did he not realise he was paying 9% interest rate? Everyone knows the interest rates are extortionate. It's in the public domain. You are told about it, and you are told that your interest rate is subject to change in your student loan contract. When he went in, it will have been over 6% interest. At that point, it could be 50%, and it doesn't really make a difference. You're going to be paying for it forever. That was kind of the point of it. Sorry, not even forever. What am I saying? You're going to be paying it most of your working life. Until you're 51 or something like that. That was the deal. That is what you were told about. You have no excuse for not knowing this.
So he's paying a fortune. He needed to get a degree for what he did.
I'm not going to lie, but that's probably not even true. I don't know what he did, to be fair. He might have needed one, but most of the time people are in subjects that have nothing to do with their degree, and they just needed to get on a grad scheme for. But there's alternative to grad schemes. Me, for example, I'm in software now. I licked rocks at uni. It was quite a different subject, but here we are. And I'd argue, I probably didn't need to go to uni to get where I am now, but it will have been a completely different route to the one I went down.
But the government, I think they sold it off to a private company. So it should be amount of inflation, or 1% above inflation, not 9%.
Yeah. So this is the problem, isn't it? It's going to always go up and up and up and up, because they have to bear in mind that they're probably not going to see most of the money back from the investment they've put into people going to uni until 30 years down the line. And then when it gets there, obviously you've got all these people going to uni who are not even going to be covering their tuition fees by the time it's all over, by the time their debt's written off. And so they have to make up for it. And they make up for it by having extortionate interest rates that most people don't have to pay off anyway, and that people who are hyper successful are going to have to pay off. But guess what those people are doing? They're moving over to America, and this was at least true when I signed up my student loans. If you live abroad for 4 years, your student loans gets written off. So you'll be paying it for 4 years while you're away, but if you're any longer than that, it's written off. You don't need to pay that anymore. Which always seemed nuts to me.
I feel sorry for your son's generation.
No, I don't for my son, because he's done very well.
Yeah,
but yeah, generally, yes, because obviously the tuition fees, housing. So when we bought a house, it was 4 times average salary, now it's 10 or 12.
Oh man, if only your local area was looking to build more dwellings. If only there was something you could do about this housing situation. If only you supported housing development. This is one thing I hate. At least some NIMBYs I know just say, yeah, screw those people. But this guy's like, yeah, I do feel sorry for this generation. They're struggling to afford housing. And then not 2 minutes ago was saying, yeah, I'm really glad our MP stopped more housing being built. And yes, I know about all the other NIMBY arguments about immigration and interest rates. Yes, I know about that. Why exacerbate the problem, though? We still need to build things. We were 30 years behind before mass immigration. We're obviously 30 years behind now, even without it.
More stressful, because they've got emails. At least when we went home from work, we escaped the office, where it follows you around 24 hours a day. So,
honestly, that is such an over-egged problem. It is quite rare that you get a job where you actually get your boss asking you to work outside of hours for free, where they will send you emails outside of work. I mean, I saw an article today saying that you can actually sue if bosses do that, which I just think is ridiculous. Sometimes you do need to stay in contact with your boss even when you're on holiday. Hell, my boss went to America for 2 weeks and he was still spending at least 2 hours a day working. Yeah, some people enjoy that. And as I say, I've been in software. That's pretty much a 24/7 job. But even then, I don't think I've ever had a call outside of working hours. I think I've only ever once had one text when I was on holiday clarifying how something worked. And I was happy to do that. It's completely over-egged, the working outside of hours issue.
And also I think for young children with COVID, there's certain children who have been affected by COVID. I've got grandchildren, so I do worry about their future. But
Oh yeah, especially very young children who just didn't have a chance to be properly socialised due to COVID. Yeah, they're not going to be doing very well, I do agree. And we can probably blame Tories for that in some respect, but let's bear in mind that pretty much every other party in Parliament at that point wanted longer and harder lockdowns, which would have made it worse. So, unfortunately on that point, Tories were probably the best option we had.
I don't think we have a leadership face currently, in my opinion. I used to like Tony Blair. He wasn't conservative.
Oh, goodness me, of course you like Tony Blair. And no, you're right, he wasn't conservative, but every conservative, it seems, is trying to emulate him ever since. Aside, obviously, from Liz Truss, but she got kicked out for that pleasure.
But I think we do lack a proper leadership face in our country. It doesn't really matter at this stage who wins or who loses. I think the problems we have faced since Brexit, which is where I've seen downfall mainly in the last 10 years. It's 2017, I would have thought.
I mean, this guy's, it's hard to tell. He seems like a first-generation immigrant. I'm basing that off the accent. But he seems like he's been here for quite a while, especially if he's saying he liked Tony Blair. I mean, bear in mind, that was what? We're coming up to 30 years ago, Blair got in first at this point. But anyway, the guy is pretty typical Londoner, left-wing Londoner. Liked Tony Blair, didn't like Brexit, whatever. But it is interesting that even on that side, the person who seemed a bit of an heir to Blair, Keir Starmer, and he's in Labour, even there people just don't see him as a leader. They don't see he's not got popular support at all, which again is why I don't think he's going to last very long. And yeah, it's become a bit of a crisis in the UK. Who is going to be our next leader? Unfortunately, pretty much both the mainstream parties now centralise their select committee. And so that incentivises just the worst type of MPs who they basically select it on how good do they look to the media. But then when it comes to actual work that they do and decisions they make, they're howling. And everyone's noticing that.
Since then, we lack leadership. We have had change of 2,000 prime ministers and 6 kings and queens and all that.
I mean, the prime minister thing, I understand the exaggeration, but the kings and queens one? We had one queen die. She was reigning for 70 years or something ridiculous. What, we changed it to King Charles? That didn't even really affect anything, to be honest with you. Which is a good thing about having a constitutional monarchy. You have a stable head of state. And it keeps everything moving, despite the fact we've had 2,000 prime ministers. That's actually a very good thing.
Is there anyone in politics that you would like to see as Prime Minister?
I did like Boris Johnson, I must say. It reminds me of Donald Trump.
Okay, I'm not too sure how now I feel about saying that this guy's a left-wing Londoner. This guy seems to be entirely a vibes-based guy. It is all I can say there. And obviously, this is a good way to get... This will be a good man to have as a good kind of test of how the normie attitude is, especially in London. And amazingly, yeah, Boris Johnson was actually quite popular, because bear in mind, he was Mayor of London before he was PM. And as he says, reminds me of Donald Trump. Well, that's just because he's charismatic. It's just a shame that he's massively lazy.
They look like brothers, but yeah, and somehow Boris Johnson has been a very strong personality in my eyes, and Rishi Sunak, in my opinion, has done a good job. He took over the position when everyone was resigning.
I could not tell you what this guy's politics were. I don't think he's ever voted in his life. As I say, this guy's just vibes-based, but I don't know where the vibes-based of Rishi Sunak did a good job came from. Absolutely nobody thinks that.
What do you make of the state of the Conservatives at the moment?
No, they're in disarray. It's a nightmare.
Do you have a preference as to who takes over as leader?
Not really.
I mean, I suppose this is a positive for the Peter Hitchin types, and, well, me included, who want both the main parties to just collapse. people are so apathetic to them that this really does seem like the best chance to actually try and take the position of official opposition for reform, say, or even if Labour completely collapse the government, even possibly become Prime Minister. I mean, I can't see it happening. I think it takes longer than 2 elections to do that, but, well, you know, we live in the clown decade. Things could go nuts after this. But people seriously are just so apathetic, as we've seen here, to pretty much every MP that we're seeing, that it is pretty amazing. I'm just amazed that reform haven't come up at all in this conversation. I'm amazed Ed didn't ask, did you consider voting reform? He's not asked that to anyone. And I'd really like to know what they think of them.
Have you been following the leadership election in the Conservative Party?
Oh, yes. I mean,
what are your
really,
thoughts on that?
I like Kimmy.
Kemi.
I think she's fantastic.
Mhm.
I think she's straightforward. I don't think she's nice. I mean, I don't mean that not nice. I
Yeah.
think she's, you know, if you're a nice person, you're not going to get very well in politics because you're not being very sincere.
I can see normie right-wingers being on Kemi Badenoch's side. The more of us that are more terminally online, obviously we have more of a memory of things she's said over the past and things she's actually done. And this is the problem. She is being pushed by the mainstream centre-right papers as their favourite. And that has made a lot of people distrustful because a lot of the mainstream centre-right papers are effectively closeted leftists who basically hate immigration. That's effectively what it looks like to an awful lot of us. But I suppose it's good to see the propaganda working. And Kemi Badenoch is still my second favourite to win. Gemrick is currently my favourite, and I guess we'll have to see how it goes. But it depends, because a lot of people will have left the party after Liz Truss was kicked out, because she was the party favourite. And if they're just going to be ignored after all this, why would they bother again?
I've seen her. I've been in the House of a meeting within the House of Parliament with her. She was phenomenal. She's very straight down the line. She's human, but she's serious, and she says it. Don't say this to me because I didn't say that.
This is definitely touching on something that I do agree with the character of Kemi Badenoch. She doesn't take any nonsense, which is what you should want from a Conservative leader. The thing is that Robert Jenrick doesn't tend to take any nonsense these days either, which is good to see, and he's more hardline on issues than Kemi, so it would be good to see that. And also, Jenrick was the type of guy who was more on the left wing of the party when he started, as he spent his time in government and ended up being junior ministers here, there and everywhere, especially in the immigration department. He started seeing just how bad things really were, and he obviously thought to himself, yeah, I really need to go more to the right here, which I find a very honest and trustworthy aspect of someone. They see how bad things really are, they start understanding what the electorate are saying when things are going badly, and then change his positions on that. So an awful lot of people, I think, will be wanting him in, but we'll have to see how the leadership contest goes, because it's not going to be like last time where there were national debates live on TV between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Instead, it's going to be a lot more boring because, frankly, everyone apart from Kemi and Robert Jenrick, it seemed pretty useless.
Great.
It's kind of like not really followed that much since the election, and it just seems a bit of a, I don't know, they seem to be clinging on to, I don't know, they don't seem to have a grip on what actually people care about in the country, I would say, and struggling to find themselves, I guess, with Reform on one side and Labour even a bit more central than maybe I would prefer, but that's meaning that they don't really have, I think they're struggling to find a position between those two parties, I would say.
Labour are more central than this guy would like them to be. Again, it's vibes based. It's all entirely based on vibes. It doesn't matter if they're saying they're jailing people for tweets. They give off this vibe that they are centrist. They are not at all. They are very, very, very far left. And yes, the Tories will be trying to be, whoever's voted in, by the way, the nicer face of effectively reform policy. That is what they are going to try and do. And I don't think it's going to work because people will see through it. Effectively, you need to see a complete overhaul of CCHQ before you see any improvement when it comes to MPs and policy in the Tory party, and that's not happened yet, but I know some people who still have hope that it'll happen. To be honest with you, ever the optimist, I have some optimism that it could happen, but I'm not willing to put on £40 for a renewed membership to vote in this election, just to hopefully see Jenrick do okay when I think Farage would do much better. So that's with the position I'm in. Anyway, that was the Vox Pop. The normies are as mental as ever, so nothing changed there. In terms of shilling, Tosh is returning tomorrow. We're doing a newscast, so it's going to be on all sorts of nonsense that Labour has done over the past 2 weeks and whatever else I can find that we need to go through. Regional variations is still TBD. I believe it should be returning at some point. We just don't know when that is because Tail's on an indefinite hiatus for now. Laughing at the Guardian, obviously, that came out on Saturday, so go watch that while you still can, because it will go behind a paywall, because I don't want the police finding out what is being said on that without paying me. But obviously the next one's the 100th, and I'm not really doing anything particularly special, I'd say, but we are getting, obviously, an exclusively woman-only panel for that, and it probably won't even go on. It'll probably actually be one of the shorter ones, because women do not have the willpower that men do. No, but seriously, it should be good, and it should be obviously involving a small little celebration with the woman. So do come along to that in 2 weeks on Friday. And obviously, videos will come out as and when. So with that, please subscribe, become a member, do all that good stuff. And obviously, that's the end of the video. So once again, thank you very much for watching. And until next time, goodbye.